I choose not to run. That's what Jerry Seinfeld proclaimed back when he was in the 9th grade. And that's the same thing that happened 20 years later, I guess. I don't know, 15, 20 years later. Somewhat in between there. Somewhat at that time. The Race is another one of my personal favorite episodes. As, just a lot of comedy, a lot of goofy things. We have the return of Mickey Abbott for the first time we've seen him in a while, which is pretty cool because I definitely think Mickey's a very underrated character that just brings another unique way of physical comedy to it. Elaine dates a communist, and of course his knowledge and his political views do spread to everybody else who seems to use his views as a way to try to stand out and succeed. Unfortunately for some of them, it bit him in the butt. One of them led for a big opportunity, but there was a catch to it. And Jerry, of course, deals with a rival holding a petty little grudge, but it is just hilarious. This episode also featured a lot of Superman references in there as well, besides music. A lot of little lines and whatnot, of course, and actions. It was Jerry being a superhero over something a little ridiculous and crazy. So the race starts off with Jerry at his new girlfriend Lois's office, waiting for Lois to get done. And it's obvious that Jerry likes saying her name. He goes, "Wait, ready to go, Lois? Excuse me, Lois. Pardon me, Lois. Jimmy's in trouble, Lois." So then Lois's boss walks in, and Lois goes to introduce Jerry to him. But before she could say the name, her boss, whose name is Duncan Meyer, cuts her off, and he's like, "Jerry Seinfeld." So obviously, there's a little bit of some tension between these two. And then, I guess Lois was supposed to join him and join George and Elaine at Elaine's apartment, which this was the first episode we do see Elaine's brand new apartment, since she had gotten kicked out at the end of season 5 in the opposite. She's supposed to join them for Chinese, but then, unfortunately, Duncan's asking her if she can stay a little longer and work on some stuff. So, Jerry said he'll come back later to pick her up. He says, "Will we be able to come pick me up later?" Well, it'd be Superman in order to do that, Lois. So, so at Elaine's apartment, George is there chilling. And he sees that there's a Daily Worker paper right now. And she goes, we didn't read from a Daily Worker. And she says her new boyfriend Ned likes to read it. And then George starts replying that maybe Ned is a communist. In which Elaine is wondering, and she says she'll find out. Then, of course, we have Jerry arriving after he left Lois's at work. And there's this grand scene that actually is the first of these sign imitations on DVD. It's like a cartoon version, acting out, certain scenes, such as this one. There is one acting out the Kramer and the Monkey, or Kramer and the Pinky Toe, and a couple other funny ones, but they're so good. Poor George looks like freaking Humpty Dumpty in his, but, the illustrations are just hilarious. But anyways, so of course, Jerry says how Lois couldn't make it, she had to work late. And of course, George's like, I can't believe you're really going out with a woman named Lois. And Jerry's like, I know, finally. But then mentions to George that Lois's boss is Duncan Meyer. In which George is like, oh my, Duncan Meyer. And Elaine's confused. And of course, Jerry acts like it's this big, dark secret, even though it's just a hilariously, petty little thing that Duncan's still holding a grudge against Jerry for. So he sits them down. And Jerry explains that back when him and George were freshmen in high school, they had everybody lined up for this race to see who would represent the school in this track meet. Jerry explains who was all there in the line. So, Mr. Babalakwa, the gym teacher, he goes, "Ready, on your mark, get set," and Jerry got so just fired up, he just took off. He just started running before he even said go. But by the time he's yelled go, he was about 10 yards ahead of everybody. And then, of course, Jerry would end up winning the race, but he was shocked because nobody noticed the head start. And because he had won by so much, as he says, a myth began to grow about his speed. But only Duncan had noticed the head start and had hated Jerry ever since. And then, of course, and then Elaine was like, what happened when he raced him again? Jerry mentions how he never did. And in 4 years of high school, he would never race anyone, not even to the block to catch a bus. And so the legend grew. Everyone begged in the race. They won in the race. They pleaded him. The track coach called his parents, telling them that it was a sin to waste his God-given talent. But he answered everyone in the same way he answered us, or whatever he said. And of course, George, every time the episode Jerry would say this, George would look down and he would just go, puts the hand down, or in the simultaneous, he'd be like it's just the hand just went, and Jerry would just say, I choose not to run. And of course, Elaine was like, so now Duncan is back. And Jerry says, he's back, as I knew he would be someday. And of course, then he complains that he drank some tart cider. Of course, he would later go to pick up Lois. And Duncan obviously mentioned the race to her, and she believed Jerry that Jerry had won by as much as he did, and he says he was faster than a speeding bullet, Lois, and whatnot. So things seemed fine. Meanwhile, Kramer got a job as Santa at a local department store or something like that, and Mickey as his assistant elf. Of course, it seems to be going well, but obviously, there's some long days. Then, there's a couple little comedy skits with, Kramer having kids sit on his lap, but, he gets startled by it and whatnot. So, and of course, it seems to be going well so far, but then, of course, things would go south with it. So, Elaine does have a date with her boyfriend, Ned, which I forgot to mention. I forgot to mention this, actually. This is kind of a key moment in the episode. Before Jerry had arrived for the Chinese, Elaine had gotten into an argument with the delivery boy from Hot Sings because they didn't bring the right food or whatnot, and she refused to pay for it. So then, because of that, they said they're going to blacklist her and put her on her do not deliver list. I don't remember what they decided to do for food after that, but anyways, so we have a scene where Elaine and Ned were talking, and Elaine asks Ned, are you a communist? And he says yes, he was a communist. And she seems to take it as a big honor. She seemed to brag about it everywhere she goes. Like, her and Ned went to visit Kramer and Mickey while they were working. But while Elaine walked away for a second, there was the three boys standing there. Ned starts saying goes on some communism rant, and of course, Mickey was taking offense to it. Basically, he was saying that people at other department stores could be making double of what Kramer is, as he thinks that everybody here who works here is crazy and whatnot. And then he talks Kramer into reading some literature he has in his car that'll change his mindset. But of course, Mickey's trying to talk him out because Mickey went out of his way to get him this job. And of course, Kramer would read the literature, and he would obviously start talking to kids about it while he was sitting on his lap. And a 4-year-old kid even realized that Kramer was talking about communism, and he starts accusing him of being a commie. And because of that, Kramer and Mickey get fired because of of what all he was starting up with all the kids and whatnot. Doing all of his repeating a bunch of the material he found in the book. Not that there's anything wrong with if you're a communist or not, but it was just, it was different views, of course, obviously. But anyways, there was that, and then Kramer got fired. So that's basically his story. George, though, when he read that article from the Daily Worker, they said something about appearance not important. So he thought he would try, pretending to be a communist and trying to get a date with this woman, Natalie, from the Daily Worker. His secretary, Ada, the same secretary he announced he would give a raise in the middle of having sex with her in the office back in the secretary, overheard George talking, and she told Steinbrenner that George was a communist. In which Steinbrenner, used that to his advantage, sending him to Cuba to try to recruit a baseball player from Cuba. Of course, because Steinbrenner thought that George was a communist, he thought that he would get along with Cuba's president, and they would let them have whoever they wanted, the Yankees wanted. Which there was a lot of deleted scenes that kind of neglected this story somewhat, but the story was that in the deleted scenes that George didn't have a visa, but Kramer still had his Cuban friends down at the I forgot what it was called. So since George couldn't get a visa, Kramer took him to see his Cuban friends to help him find a way to get into Cuba with their help. Of course, in the deleted scene, the doors were locked, so Kramer snuck in while in his Santa Claus outfit still. He went down the chimney, but George did go to Cuba, and at the end of the episode, and the closing credits, since this was one of the first few episodes where they did the thing where they had Steinbrenner doing the voice of, Larry David doing the voice of Steinbrenner, and they had Lee Barry, just, with his head, the back of his head to the camera, doing the motions and whatnot, that. They kind of did the same thing in Cuba with Fidel Castro, and smoking a cigar. But of course, I don't think it was the same voice or whatnot. Of course, probably not the same actor. But they did the same thing whenever George went to see Castro and doing the voice that someone else just with their back turned to the camera, just pointing actions to the voice or whatnot. And then of course, even though the communism stuff spread from Ned, while they went shopping, Elaine tried to get Ned to go do some clothes shopping, which he was not for at first. But he did, and he said he'd try it on. And then later in the day, she went to order Chinese for them, but of course Ned wanted them to do Hop Sings. But again, he got blacklisted, and of course she didn't tell Ned that. So then Elaine went to order, but the guy, the same delivery boy, recognized it was Elaine, which you can see her name on the back on the Do Not Deliver list, and they had exclamation points by her name, making a reference obviously to whenever she got into a fight with Jake Jarmel over not using exclamation points in a note that he had left her. But so Elaine said, that was trying to say, no, someone else lives here, and she had to give a name, so she gave Ned's name. And when they dropped off the food for Ned, Elaine accidentally walked out, and then the delivery boy recognized her. So he also put Ned on the list from Hop Sings, getting him blacklisted from Hop Sings, just like Ned's father had did. Which, of course, obviously caused Elaine and Ned to go Splitsville. Meanwhile, though, in the main story, Duncan still obsessing over the fact that he believes that he got ripped off in that match, and he's just upset how nobody else noticed the head start except for him. He has lunch with Jerry. So he has lunch with Jerry and Lois, and of course, obviously knowing that all it was going to be was just for Duncan to try to once and for all just admit to Jerry admit to Duncan that he got a head start, and will help cover it up. George showed up and acted like he hadn't seen Jerry in how many years since high school, which of course Duncan didn't know, but it was just funny how, like, George was like, like, so surprised, oh my gosh, Jerry, I haven't seen you in so long, and then, like, Jerry's, like, mocking George of stuff that, he knows it's true about George, like, you remember about him being bald, and, about him, being an architect. He says he designed the new addition to the Guggenheim, and then, of course, he's getting ready to leave, but then that's when George, tells a story about, first, he tells a story about how he claims he fooled around with Miss Stafford or something like that, one of their old teachers. But then he, sides with Jerry, which Duncan still was not happy about. So finally, Lois just suggested, why don't you two just race again, which Jerry doesn't want to do. But Duncan's like, I noticed you didn't want to race me years ago because you couldn't beat me then, and you can't beat me now. Even though it's so petty, Jerry finally just at first agreed to do so. But then he wanted to call it off because Duncan was calling all his friends from high school to come and watch. So he's like, I can't let the legend die. And I can't find out there's no Santa Claus. So at first he calls it off until then he threatens to fire Lois if Jerry doesn't do the race. So finally, of course, for Lois, of course, Jerry does the race. And Lois said that, tells Duncan, if he beats you, that I want a big raise. And then Duncan said, well, if he beats me, I won't only give you a raise, I'll send you to Hawaii for 2 weeks. And of course, Mr. Babalopoulos was there, to, fire off the gun just like he did back in high school. But of course, on the count of 3, 1, 2, and then there was an early bang, which was just the sound of Kramer's car turning on. Because Kramer was warming up the car because after the race, Kramer had to take George to the airport because his Cuban friends were going to help George get to Cuba to go see Castro for to try to get a player for the Yankees. But of course, off of that, Jerry heard the sound, that loud sound. Of course, everybody just assumed that that was the gunshot, but Duncan was the only one who noticed that it wasn't. So of course, Jerry got another head start, and of course to the Superman theme, and all in slow-mo. Jerry wins the race, and of course Duncan's flipping out going, he got a head start, but nobody, even Mr. Babalaqua, didn't even notice, and Duncan hadn't even pushed him. But there's this shot of like Jerry running towards the crowd to celebrate, and Elaine's like right in front of the crowd going to hug Jerry, but then Jerry, there's a slow motion shot of like Jerry moving his arm out of the way, and just like bam, pushing Elaine out of the way just so he can get the Lois, which was absolutely hilarious. And of course, finally before, of course, the ending credit, of course, but the last shot was of Jerry and Lois asking Jerry if he'll go to Hawaii with her, and Jerry goes, maybe I will, Lois, maybe I will. And for the first, and I think only time in the series, Jerry breaks the fourth wall and looks at the camera, gives it a wink as the episode goes off the air. And that's the race. Again, lots of Superman references, just the silly stories with, again, the pettiness of, Duncan Meyer holding the grudge against Jerry over a race that happened, 15, 20 years earlier. To, of course, having Ned, basically, get, communism ideas in everybody's mind, and it basically, just comes back to bite them. Again, it was his views, so, that's just what he thought. But, a lot of craziness. And then, of course, Elaine gets blacklisted from a Chinese restaurant, unfortunately. But that's the race, guys. Again, not as much of a favorite as the Switch, but it's still definitely, I would say, I would put it still in probably my top 10 for one of my favorite episodes. Especially because of Jerry going, I choose not to run. But that was the race, guys. That's what we'll do for this review. Next, we'll be in The Label Maker, where we learn about regifting. Who is this regifter? Who also had given Jerry a label baby junior? We'll see you guys. See you guys in the next video for review The Label Maker. So once again, as always, guys, slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content to my channel, and follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Till then, guys, I'm checking out. I will catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night, and peace out, everybody.